Hey guys, Eric here from Moski Homebrew. It's the morning of brew day for a Yarlow Pilsner for me. I've got to crunch the numbers, so I figured it was a good time to show you the 3 programs and websites that we used to come up with all of our brew day numbers, volumes, temperatures, and things like that. So let's grab a cup of coffee and let's go at it. Boom, record. All right, so the first program we're going to go into is Beersmith. Beersmith allows us to develop our own recipes, it basically calculates original gravity, bitterness, color, estimated ABV. It has different style profiles. You can put all of your equipment in all of the profiles that you use for brewing, and it'll basically do all the math on the back end and then show you the results when you add certain ingredients and whatnot. It's got an integrated timer, sessions, mash timer, how to make a starter. We really just use it to build our recipes and make customizations, store our recipes for each of my homebrew setup and his homebrew setup. You can change your profiles, your water profiles, your mash temperatures, your timers, your sessions, volumes, salts, yeast starters. I mean, it does everything for you. It's just something we have not dove into quite yet. We use some other things for different parts of the brew day. So if you have a recipe already laid out for you, you may not need the Beersmith, but you want to have that recipe on hand. So once you have your recipe, you're going to need the batch size, the total amount of grain that you're going to use, your boil time, and maybe some additional information once we jump into one of the other programs. Beersmith to us is more of just a repository for recipes. We don't use it for the whole brew day. We just build our recipes and it can output our estimated gravity, bitterness, color, ABV. We can put in our brew house efficiency. We can put in the batch size, the boil time, and it'll kind of give us a rough idea of what our recipe is going to be at the end of the brew day. So that is a quick look at Beersmith. That's what we use. Once we're done building our recipe, or if you, like I said, if you have a recipe, you don't necessarily need this part. But once you have that, the next thing we're going to want to do is actually go into our Brewger website. We love to use Brewger. It is very easy. You can use it on the fly, especially on brew day. I typically print out each of the pages and have them out on brew day, but things like if my grain is a different temperature than what I initially inputted into this calculator, I can pull it up on my phone, re-enter the information that I need to, and actually figure out what my target strike temperature might be if it's different from when I initially calculated out. So going into Brewger, we're using the Mash and Sparge Infusion water calculator. And here we're just going to enter in our grain weight, which, looking back at our Beersmith, I almost said Brewger, we've got 9, 10, 11. We're going to go ahead and include the rice and corn flaked and the Pilsner 2-row. So that's 11 pounds. We get 11 pounds there. Our grain temp, typically, if it sits in the garage, it's probably around 65 to 70. Like I said, we can always adjust for that on the fly, opening this up on our phone, and then changing that grain temp to get the right strike temperature, because that's what's using that calculation for the strike temperature. You're going to input your grain temp, you're going to then input your target mash temp, which we're going to go for 150. So if your grain's a little bit cooler, you need to warm it up more, meaning your strike water is going to be warmer. Then we have our option of mash thickness. Typically we do about 1.2 to 1.5, just depending on how much grain we have. Today we're doing 1.5. Total boil time, that will also come from the recipe. We're doing a 60-minute boil because we have a 60-minute hop addition for this Pilsner. And then we've got total wort into the fermenter, which is 5.5 gallons. Typically you'll see 5-gallon recipes because we use 5-gallon kegs. We want to try and fill the 5-gallon kegs as much as possible. So we will be doing 5.5. Means we need to add a little bit of extra to our recipe, but that's one reason why we use Beersmith, so we can make those adjustments, see how they all fall in the calculations. Most of these numbers you won't probably change. Grain absorption probably stays around the same each time. Spent grain absorption, same thing. hot liquor tank to mash tun heat loss. So this is one if you're using a pump to get your water from your hot liquor tank to your mash tun, like a pump, or it's going to cool down in the line moving over there. We just put 0 in here because we typically dump it in and it's pretty quick. We don't lose much heat going through that, so we just leave it at 0. Mash tun loss, so that's kind of the amount of liquid on the bottom of the mash tun that it won't pick up just because of the way it's designed or built. Brew kettle trub loss is the same amount for the boil kettle. Boil loss, how much do you boil off in an hour? We're probably at about a gallon. It's probably about the average. Wort shrinkage, that should probably stay about the same. That is the amount of boiled wort will shrink when cooled. So when you boil water, it actually expands a little bit, and when you cool it, it will contract a little bit. So the total water needed for this brew day is going to be almost 9 gallons. Mash tun capacity will be 5 gallons, which means we don't need our 10-gallon mash tun, but it's the only one we have. We could get away with a 5-gallon one if we absolutely had to. Mash and strike volume, that is the volume of the water we're going to heat up for strike. That is 4.38 gallons. Hot liquor tank temperature, that is, we don't actually use a hot liquor tank per se. If you have a differentiation between your hot liquor tank and your strike temperature for your mash tun, that's where it would show you, but since we put 0 for the mash tun to heat loss temperature, it's going to stay the same. So our strike temperature is 160.67. We'll probably shoot for like 162 like I was saying earlier. When we move it over, it'll cool off. First runnings for the mash is going to be about 2 3/4 gallons. So that's after the mash, going straight to the boil kettle, we'll have about 2 3/4 gallons. Sparge volume is the amount of water we will use to rinse the grains after the first runnings, get all the residual sugars from the grain. And then the total runoff, all of the liquid going from the mash tun or through the mash tun to the boil kettle will be 7.2 gallons. Now that we have those numbers, we're going to move over to our salts and what sheet we use. I'm not going to go into too much detail on how to fill the sheet out, but I wanted to show you and give you an idea of what we use, how we input our information using from a recipe to our brewing salt sheet. A little bit of coffee break, camera break, need a new battery. Boom! So now we're going to move on to our easy water calculator. This is probably the simplest form that we have been able to find and actually be able to get some good calculations out of it and good numbers. It's just what we've been using, what we've learned on. The brewing salts can be kind of daunting at first, and this has really made it easy for us to jump into the brewing salts and start adjusting some stuff. So today we're going to be using distilled water, which means our water profile will be 0 across the board. That's what we're going to assume at least. May not be quite 0, but it's going to be pretty darn close. So calcium, magnesium, sodium, chloride, sulfate, and bicarbonate, alkalinity, those are all going to be 0 for distilled water. Now, typically people will sometimes tell you to go get a water profile test and then input your numbers in here. Or some people will buy an RO system and then they can also use zeros for that because RO and distilled water is the same thing, just 2 different processes. We choose to buy distilled water. We'll probably end up going the RO route here in a little bit. Since we're using distilled water, we're going to put zeros in all those. Mash water volume and sparge water volume is going to come from our sheet from Brugger. So mash strike volume 4.38 gallons and sparge volume 4.58 gallons. So that's what we put in here. Percentage of distilled or RO, we could put 100, but since our numbers are all 0 anyways, it's not going to change anything, I don't think. What this is saying is how much of the starting water profile are you using versus RO or distilled. Are you adding any RO or distilled to it to bring those numbers down or half it? That is what that's saying. Since we're using distilled water for everything, 0 or 100% or anything really works for that one. Enter the grain. So this is the part that gets a little tricky because you got to know kind of what family it goes into on the right side. Still not too difficult. Kind of do kind of a best guess type thing. Our recipe, going back to it, we have flaked corn and flaked rice and then 2 rows. So that's a pretty easy one. We got grain type 6, which is here, base Pilsner, has a pH of 5.75. We've got 10 pounds of it. 10 pounds or 9? 9 pounds. That's actually wrong. Let me change that. 9 pounds of that. And then we have, I selected grain type 9, which is base other, just for the 2 pounds of flaked corn and flaked rice. It's not a perfect fit, but just to get our mash thickness correct for all the other calculations below, that's what I end up putting in. So if you've got any other solutions or any other comments to that, leave a comment in the description below. So once you get those numbers entered, it's going to throw out, I'm gonna go ahead and zero this out for now, and we'll just work through this. It will give you then a estimated mash pH at room temperature, so 5.74. If you start adding gypsum, calcium chloride, some of these down here, it'll actually start to lower the pH. When you will notice that there's also a section here for lactic acid or acid in general. I think this was 10%. If you have 10% acid, you can put 10% in this box and it'll calculate it out. So as we add, 2 mils of acid, our pH is going to come down. I shoot for about 5.2 pH, which is a little lower. Every time I shoot for 5.2 pH in this software, for whatever reason, maybe the water or maybe my calculations are slightly screwed up, it ends up being a little bit higher, 5.3 or 5.4. So anywhere, I shoot for 5.2 in the sheet, so that's what I'll do for today. Before we get to the lactic acid, let's get to the gypsum, calcium chloride, and Epsom salt. I've got a water profile in my head, and as you see, as we change these numbers in here, resulting water profile in the beer changes on the bottom. And this 4A mash pH down box will bring the pH down. 4B will bring the pH up. And then step 5 is basically viewing and reviewing the resulting water profile from those changes. I previously had 5 and 5 here, and that got me the water profile I want. They've got some recommended ranges for certain things down here. And then you also have your chloride to sulfate ratio. This is what a lot of people believe are very important for New England IPAs. We even talked about it in one of our videos a while back. We gave you our thoughts on it, but for this Pilsner IPA, we're going to shoot for a balanced chloride to sulfate ratio. 74 calcium and 71 chloride, 82 sulfate. It's probably pretty good, but we do still need to get this mash pH down. So I think I had maybe 4, 5, 6 mils. That seems kind of a lot. Let's do 5 mils. We'll just put 5 mils in here. That brings it down to about 5.2. Probably our resulting mash pH probably be around 5.3, 5.4, which would be in range for what we want. So that's basically it. It's about 10 or 15 minutes running through each of these sheets, grabbing information from one, putting it into another. And like I said earlier, you can probably do all this in Beersmith, but this is just the way we've been doing it for quite some time. And then, like I said, we just started jumping into the water profile and brewing salts. So this is the sheet that we've been using. It makes it kind of easy to dive into, not quite as daunting as some of the other ones. And it puts it in pretty easy, pre-calculated stuff. So if you guys have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up. Recommend subscribing. Come out more content similar to this. And we will see you guys next time. Cheers.